Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to my conversation about memory with Alex Molina and Johannes Niederhauser. I will set some context for this really interesting conversation in a moment, but first, some housekeeping. So the main thing is the Circling and Dialogos workshop is going to be on February 19th and 20th. That's Saturday and Sunday. This Saturday and Sunday coming up. The links for that are below with all the information how to register. It's going to be taught by John Vervaeke, myself, and Christopher, and it will be an advancement and a refinement of the first Dialogos weekend that we did, which was really, really awesome. And so this one even has more people in it. So all the people who signed up last time were just extraordinary. We had so much fun. It was so deep and personal, and personally insightful, and ontologically, transcendently ecstatic at many points. And really, really digging into the deeper skills and capacities, all the skills and capacities that one develops in thinking and conversing with the Logos. So again, the link for that is below. Okay, so this conversation on memory is I found this one really interesting in a lot of ways. One of the things I think this conversation exemplifies is the dialogue. It's the kind of dialogue and the kind of thinking that I felt we were participating in was, I think, what Heidegger would call a thinking that isn't a representing, not a represencing what we already knew, and not a representational, not a thinking that represents memory and gets clear on it like we can then have it, but more of engaging in a kind of a non-representational thinking, a kind of maybe an inceptual thinking, in some sense standing before what isn't immediately intelligible about memory and listening to it and following the movement of the conversation. So it was really interesting because I hadn't thought that much about memory, and it's not like I walked away being clear on what memory is in some kind of definite sense, but I walked away a lot closer to whatever memory is, which was I've come to recognize that whatever memory is, it is a lot more constituting of reality, more than I was at all thinking beforehand. So I thought that was really, really interesting, and it was nice meeting Alex for the first time. Alex, I believe, has been taking some of Johannes's courses that you can find out more about at his channel, and enjoy the conversation. Thank you. Now, all right, the Orwellian voice told us they're watching, so let's go ahead and start.
But there's no they there. That's just,
yeah.
That's, yeah, anyways.
Yes.
It's even worse, There's no one there at the other end.
We're talking about
it's watching, but anyways, go on.
Yeah. So I'm you guys had a and I'll post the first conversation that you guys had on memory in the show notes. And so I'm joining in on a conversation that you guys were already underway. So Alex, do you want to maybe
Axel.
you could start. Oh, I'm sorry,
Axel.
Axel. Yes, I'm sorry, my dyslexia. Um, refers to those things. If you want to start, just kind of introducing the topic and the first conversation and what you've been thinking about since, and however you want to present that.
Okay. Yeah, good. After listening to the previous conversation, I realized that I hadn't really clarified exactly what it is that I was even talking about. Talking about things relating to memory, but essentially, at some point, this is kind of was born. The idea of things as memory, as I talked about with Johannes, was it just basically came from my own phenomenal experience. In I think maybe the best way to introduce it is just in that way, and to think about, for example, what happens when when you look at someone that looks familiar, or if you ever had the experience of looking at someone, that person kind of looks like a combination maybe of two people, like maybe two celebrities or something like that, right? There's a recognition there, kind of like a familiarity, and you can kind of pull on those threads, and they'll take you to one person or the other, and that lives somewhere in your memory, let's say. But it's not just limited to people, and I notice that this happens to me, not just, and I've always been very good at that, at telling this person looks like a combination of these people, very specifically, and I started to pay attention to that happening with all just things in general. And sometimes it's not a very concrete, thing or part that you can pull off and follow, but it's more of a thread. It's like it has the same feeling to it as remembering. Sorry for the kitchen noises. If someone gives you a present, for example, that present is kind of marked by that occasion of the gift. It's a birthday present, for example, and all of that goes into the thing. Typically, people would think about, oh well, you're being reminded of these things that are sort of tangential to what the thing actually is, which of course is just a bunch of atoms or whatever. It's matter. But because I abandoned that particular point of view, and I really started to think of things as described by Heidegger as gatherings, I started to think of things as gatherings of memories, memories always present, always coming together into into this whole. They're parts, but they're not these kind of deleterious parts. They're not timeless parts. They're spatial temporal parts. They're more like voices, or like parts in a play. You kind of, when you remember, you kind of go into these other times, and so that's how I started really to see things as gatherings of memories. It's very kind of seems magical. It is. I mean, it's it's levels of, it's kind of like levels of Harry Potter like magic that but except it's not fantasy, I don't think. And the other, I mean, one thing that I think kind of helps illustrate, a didactic kind of tool to help illustrate kind of what I mean by this is the photomosaics. I think everyone has seen photomosaics. They're these photographs that are composed of tiny little photographs in such a way that if you zoom out, you see the kind of the original image, and then when you zoom in, you see, oh well, it's actually little tiny photographs that kind of match different parts of the image. And that is it resembles kind of what I mean when I say things are made of memory. It's sort of this zooming in is kind of like this remembering, if you will. And when you zoom out, there's a forgetting, and then and sort of detail is lost. But in that forgetting, there's also this coming together. Each one of those little photographs has its own time, that it belongs to its own occasion, and it joins together into this greater picture. So, but the merging, of course, into things, the spatial temporal merging is such that we never really see the edges. It's not like we see edges of the photograph, little tiny photographs. We never see the edges, because those edges, they're always at the limit. They're always at the limit of our horizon. So that's the way I see it. What opened the possibility for this and to be able to see this is I was just really thinking the way that Johannes explained Aragonus, I guess, in one of his videos, and or several of his videos that stuck with me was what Aragonus, the realm of that which remains when openness throws itself into itself. Something to that effect. That may not be an exact quote, but something to that effect. Or
would you say that again? The way that Aragonus what?
The realm or that which remains when openness throws itself into itself. And my understanding of that is, the realization of sort of being with a Y, right? Of being is this openness, this drawing, right? This drawing of things, and our encounter with that, if we can call it that, being kind of an attitude or our own kind of an openness, a coinciding, let's say, of our openness with that openness. It gives us the realization that things appear in many different ways, not just as matter, not just as this or that, but they can appear in so many different ways, and there's no reason or no criteria that we can use to decide how it is that we want for things to appear. And so also, so for that reason, it made a lot of sense for me to see things as made of memories in the sense that things appear as differently in different times. And so in the last talk, I think I gave the example of looking at the clouds, looking at a sunset, and it looks like operatic or divine or something like that. And that's a common experience, I think, for people in general, to look at the clouds and to see all kinds of things. And that understanding of the cloud, that what you're actually seeing there is something that comes from a different time. It's similar to what you would see in a painting, of Jesus or something, some divine painting that you would see. And so the meaning of that somehow derived from that other time bleeds into our own time, right? Or into where we are. And so the future, let's say the futurity of other times gets projected into our futurity. And it's something that happens across, all times that that there's no kind of limit to it. And so there's this kind of merging together of all of these different ways of appearing, of things appearing from all different times and epochs and occasions into into our time, our into our whether things make sense to us, and that happens precisely because of this understanding of things being able to appear in many different ways, and not just as as matter. So that's kind of, I think, what I didn't really clarify in the previous video, which I guess now that maybe clarify things a little more in terms of where I'm coming from.
Anything you would add to just in terms of what you guys covered in the last conversation, Johannes?
No, so something will come. So
that as I've been thinking about memory, I realize that memory is something I don't really have given really much thought to. And as I was thinking about it, I kept noticing and maybe this would be good to go into, which is, what is the distinction between history and memory?
Yeah.
Right there. I noticed, like, I would start thinking about memory, and then I'd realize, like, actually, I would start replacing the word memory with history. And I'm like, and I just noticed that, and I'm like, are they the same thing? What is the difference? And also the other thing about, it seems inherent with memory that somehow the loss of memory seems to belong to it on some level. And there's a weird thing going on. You guys talked, like a lot about Gestalt and towards the end of the last video. And it's interesting because we have such a substance storage idea about memory now, to the point where I actually know young, we have these kind of autistic young priests of the internet, right? Who like pitch venture capitalists and get millions of dollars on these obscure ideas. And they do things like one of them has, like, walks around with a camera around his neck, terrified that he's going to lose anything. Like, literally records his life. And it's just self-evident for him that, like, you ask him about it, I'm like, why are you, are you actually recording this right now? He's like, well, I don't want to, like, memory is just so precious. I don't want to lose anything. Like,
yeah. When is he going to watch it, though? After he dies, I hope.
That's the thing. I asked him, he never watches it.
But you can't. You have to watch it after you die, which is why. Yeah. Yes. That's hell. Because it's very tedious. Everyday life is just tedious. You want to go through. I have no idea what I've done today.
Yeah.
You want to do this again? You think about it, that's hell. That's actually definitely, that could be 21st century hell.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, absolutely.
And you do this for 60 years.
Yeah.
Then they basically they freeze you in time, but they shoot this into your brain. You can just watch this for the next 60 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
That's just hell. That's hell. You have to relive every second, every moment of your existence.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good luck. I mean,
yeah.
But that's very important. Also, that the language is used there, right? Memory stick, different forms of memory in computers, etc. That's striking that it has to work with memory, and that also so many of the science fiction films of the 90s especially dealt with memory. Total Recall, for example, or John Mnemonics, I think, was with Keanu Reeves. Been uploading memories. The Matrix is about that also.
Yeah.
Able to have certain skills or so just uploaded to your brain, or memories even.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Baked, basically.
Yeah.
And so I wonder, though, memory, there are other words in English that we could use or say. Recollection. remembrance, to remind is one, to remind oneself, to be reminded. So I wonder, because you're both native English speakers, what is the difference between memory and recollection, for example?
That's so tricky. Yeah, I've been thinking about remembering, recollecting.
Even recall, right? So like call again. There's this silly element. You don't know if they're going to answer.
Right.
There's this. It seems that there's something really, really. I'm not sure about this, but it seems like memory inherently somehow is what it is in relationship to its possible loss, right?
All the time. If we remember, we don't.
Yeah.
But if we memorize, just by definition of how we understand the word in everyday parlance, something that's only memorized is not necessarily understood. Mm-hmm. Certainly not thought through.
Yeah.
It's just information that's been, well, memorized. Can't think of a synonym at the moment. So it's repeatable, but it's not necessarily something that is deeply then ingrained in our being.
Yeah.
So we can go deeper into the call and the recall. What is it that's calling when we recall something or someone or some memory? We're not accessing a data storage.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You call it a substance.
Yeah. There's something that we can call, but will it respond? That there's something about memory that has almost, in some sense, a life of its own. And one of the things I've noticed about, and I've noticed this, in myself, but I've also in what I do, I'm constantly with people in the moment where they have an insight. And it's so interesting, an insight happens, some new horizon opens up, because once the flash goes on, right, literally you can watch their eye movements do this thing. And I've asked them what they're doing with their eyes, like shortly after, like there's the aha, is that they're going back, right? And they're going back, and they're, in some sense, seeing that they hadn't seen this and it had been somehow true the whole time, and they're just now seeing it, right? Yeah. There's this element of memory that, in some sense, it's interesting. It's like, in some sense, memory is kind of it. I never quite thought about it like this until right now, but in some sense, it's almost like, I guess the analogy would be something like when you're in a crowded, like you're in a crowded festival or something, and there's so much noise going on, and like you're engrossed in a conversation, and then somehow you hear the sound of your own name way in the background, like that catches you. And it's almost like as if something in you is like waiting, listening for the sound of your own name, right? You're totally engrossed. There's so much noise going on and activity. But if you hear the sound of your own name, even when you're not consciously listening to it, it's like all the animals hush and you're like, ooh, like as if there's an ear open. And I would imagine that there's something about this horizon or a possibility that opens up, and especially the possibility that opens up that reveals what was already the case that you had not seen.
Yeah.
There's just something almost as if it's waiting for that to then kind of find out the past that you didn't know that you had. So there's this kind of, there's this very living kind of mysterious thing going on there that I think is really interesting. It's always fascinated me.
At this point, I don't really differentiate very much from remembering from just unconcealment. I think in regards to the difference between, let's say, memory and history, it seems that really when I think about it, it seems that memory is simply just what has been, and it's what has been that's right that comes towards us from the future. I mean, it's always what has been. But when we use the word memory, I think that we're emphasizing the fact that that particular has been is from another time, with its own different understanding, its own occasion, its own light. And so it's an unconcealment, but that crosses sort of temporal boundaries, right? And so it's more of an intense unconcealment than simply just, if we're kind of sticking to the time that we're in or the occasion that we're in. But again, it's we're moving toward, and the future's moving toward us, and we are kind of moving toward it. But it's what has been. I think, and I think I mentioned, I think of this sort of ecstatic synchronization is kind of the term that I think about, which is this synchronizing of some future from another time and becoming synchronized with sort of our futurity, and then coming toward us. So it's this, right? It's that, and so that's and so so memory, the it's a very dramatic kind of unconcealment in that sense, and also, I guess another thing that memory emphasizes is precisely because it emphasizes this cross-temporal boundary, or sort of like this, or like a temporal incursion or something like that. Then it acts as sort of this bridge. It's emphasizing this kind of bridging aspect between times, which, it kind of so it's kind of the threading together aspect of times, right? Which kind of to form this this weaving of times as Science-Geschichte, right?
Yeah.
So then remembering or unconcealing and making sort of these cross-temporal excursions or incursions, is really moving through the Science-Geschichte. And so it's history in that sense of history, but it's a history which is ecstatic. It's ecstatic history.
Yeah.
And it's another thing that's, I think, that goes along with the idea of memory is how it is that times are bridged, and it seems like it happens through like rhyme, like the rhyme, there's a rhyme, it's sort of in the same way that when you look at someone and they look familiar, well, they sort of rhyme with someone else. It's not a simple just like comparing features and the geometry of their face or whatever. No, there's a rhyme. That's what familiarity is all about, rhyme. And it's in this rhyme, that rhyme is sort of that space, or the same, let's say, that merges times, that merges futures together. And so that's sort of like there's this kind of this the bridging of times is also cut up with this rhyming of times.
The bridging of times is, this rhyming I like what you're talking about in this kind of sense of weaving. Like you're thinking about context, right? The textile, the sense of something, like the time itself on some level is in memory is a weaving together, like in some sense on its own, right? In some sense on its own in a big way.
Mm-hmm. We respond when we remember something. Really, we are. There's a rhyme already there that we become attuned to.
Yeah.
And in that becoming attuned to that rhyme, then other other times come to us as that uncovering or remembering.
Yeah.
Or just something like that.
In some sense there's if you give any thought to oral, like pre-literate culture, it's when you really think about it, it's very difficult to actually to kind of put yourself in what it may have been like for them, and think about what language is and what a mind was. And you can kind of, you get this sense that before literacy, novelty would have been so threatening, right, to the oral mind. Like so much of the mind's resources on some level were had to be devoted to rhythms, and like you're talking about, rhyme, and this kind of involvement. Like it's interesting, like I bring this in, this sense of literacy in some sense gives us a sense of being able to hold our memory, which in some sense affords us to not have so much of our resources on all of that, right? So it's this interesting thing about this openness to novelty, right? Like I'm kind of hearing this in the backdrop of what you're talking about as well.
Yeah, like almost like maps. We've our books are like are like maps, or spatial temporal maps. And that free us in a way we don't want to forget, right? We want to just put aside and then be able to access again later.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's interesting that the kind of maybe the power of the written word, and then also the danger of the written word and what it can do to our perception of history. And maybe that's part of this process of writing down history, is to be the first step in the reification of the science.
The reification, yes.
Yeah.
and so this, maybe people are listening who don't know what reification means. Think of it as, maybe it's not the same, but we could say that ossification, or certain stifling. And then the weirdest thing is that we have this extended memory now. Nietzsche says somewhere, the man with the longest memory will own the future. And if you think of, that's, for example, utterly non-Greek. The old Greeks were not concerned with anyone not Greek. Were not concerned with, say, what, the researching into. Everyone kind of knew about Troy, but it would never have dawned on them to go find the ruins of Troy, or even to preserve their own temples for all times. We preserve all kinds of ruins, right? And at the same time, the question is, thinking of Goethe's Faust, as his Faust says at some point, Spengler came up a lot in our last dialogue on the Faustian spirit, etc. And awesome. Spengler says about the Faustian spirit that this spirit, he's not advocating for it or something. He just says this is who we are, and there's no way around it. Anyone who's achieved anything in Europe is in one way or another a Faustian spirit in the past 1,000 years, going back into the early beginnings of it in the 9th or 8th century or so, whenever he pins that down. So, when Faust says, and I only thought about this morning, when he says, actually in a dialogue with one of my private students where this came up, where Faust says, two souls, zwei Seelen hausen in meiner Brust. So 2 souls are indwelling in my chest. I thought maybe it's the Faustian soul that wants to memorize everything, remember everything perfectly, and have the longest memory, so we can own the future. But also at the same time, the other part of the soul, the other soul, wants to and has to forget, because the burden is simply too heavy, too cumbersome, too unbearable of such an extended memory. And there is, in line with, Axel used the word process. Of course, I always warn against using the word process, because process is transparent. But in vernacular, what we mean is a certain goings on. I'm trying to speak as vernacular, most vernacular fashion. That is, we think when we terms of history, it's just epochs, right? It's just that there's the Greeks and the Romans and the Mayans, and there's this, that, and it's all just in silos. But maybe it isn't in silos. Maybe there's something ongoing, and we are, in some sense, oblivious to some of the deeper goings on, precisely which have to do, strangely enough, with memory, and what we so benignly call history. So there's a passage in Plato's Phaedrus dialogue where, and I don't know how to pronounce this in English, it's Teut, we would say in German, maybe it's Theeth, who was, so in the Phaedrus, Socrates recounts the story of ancient Egypt, and the Greeks, if they turn to anyone, they turn to the Egyptians. That's really the only other people or language or say culture, civilization they care for. Who gives to the king, or we would say to the pharaoh, presents to him written language. And I think, the words used, of course, in Greek are about techne, and he's a technike, a technician, Theeth is. And he says to him, this, O king, so addressing the pharaoh, this knowledge will make the Egyptians wiser, and it will strengthen their memory, because it has been invented as a means or an instrument for memory. But then the pharaoh responds, "Oh, you masterful technician Theeth, so I'm skipping a bit ahead. He says, the issue is now that people will begin to rely on writings. That means on something that's coming from outside and foreign forms, but will no longer be able to remember or recall from their own withinness." Paraphrasing Plato a bit here. And hence he says, you did not invent something for memory, but something for erinnern. So it's I don't know how to, maybe let's say not for memory, but for memorizing. So something that comes from outside, no longer. We can talk about anamnesis, etc. in Plato. The memory of the soul remembers again the forms when it is born and comes in touch with the world. But so here explicitly in the Phaedrus, writing is mentioned as devastating to human memory. And so if let's say, this is the case, and it's ongoing, as Axel also said, then we are in what's occurring still part of this technological development that for some reason or other that I don't know yet, maybe I will find out at some point, attacks or works with and attacks maybe also human memory. It needs human memory also, right? This is the strangest thing. So it needs the constant uploading of memory. It requires, you go on Facebook, you have a timeline, so it makes your life linear. It stretches everything into a linear event series. There's my life event of the wedding, then there's the life event of death, I guess. They don't have that in there yet. Maybe they will. So you got this linear process that works with your memories, and if you use an iPhone or something, it keeps sending you memories, as images, right? Which then, and the strangest thing, of course, is that the images or pictures can become your memories instead of your inner remembering of something, and you take them to be more objectively valid, of course, than how you remember it. Because we say that our memory is faulty, so we need to have it objectified and stored as data that's reliable, that's not manipulable, etc. Whereas this would be then the opposite of what I think Axel called before living memory. It's no longer living. We're maybe in some sense speaking a bit poetically, but drowning in an abundance of memorized particles that don't necessarily speak to us or are not alive. They're silicon.
That's really ironic. You're right. It is really ironic that there's such an emphasis on memories and on presenting your cherished memories to you. On social media. I mean, it's what it is. I mean, an Instagram feed, it kind of reads as a historical account, right? Someone's Twitter history. It's people's histories are their Twitter feeds, and that's so interesting. It's marketed as that, and they always kind of make a big deal out of as if the most important thing that a platform can do is to keep your memories for you organized and safe, right?
And
linear. On the cloud.
And linear,
right?
Always chronological. And history. I mean, so
concealment.
Well, you can write chronological histories, which surmount to and then, or we can understand that there's something other going on, I think, which is, and maybe I'm making this up or I'm fooling myself, and it's all too obvious, and maybe it's always been the case, but I don't think so. There's something strange in the availability that we have of seemingly any historical and what we now call prehistorical data.
So the buffet of history.
Of history, of metaphysical positions. It's all just standing there on a supermarket shelves. But the question is, does it in any sense that's important or transformative or experiential speak to us? I pointed this out in a dialogue with John Vervaeke and Daniel Zaraba. I think that's the one which is on Daniel's channel. So what was such a long, Daniel gave it such a long title, I can't remember it. Yeah. So the in being something. So yeah. What was it? No, I forgot what I wanted to say. Yeah, there you go. That's bad memory.
Irony is great.
That's pretty good, yeah. Mm-hmm. I got lost in the long title. I couldn't remember that one. And
you were saying something about history. Maybe as I was hearing you say something about history, the way that it's written, whether it speaks to us, and it's
okay. Yeah. There's a shift, and I mentioned this there. There's a shift that, ironically, we can almost date to the 18th century. Where Geschichte or history becomes its own subject. So that there's what we probably would call a meta history. And it's so history itself becomes also a Science-Geschichte is part of this, right? Of this development, Heidegger's Science-Geschichte, of this questioning what history really is. And at the same time, this is also the beginning of the occurrence of ideologies, any kind of isms that are proclaimed as future to own the future. So, and what also occurs around this time and then intensifies, and now we're living in the sheer madhouse of that, is that we invent concepts or isms that have almost no experiential content. So they have no memory content. There's no memorial address, to put it like this, right? Listen to this, right? Memorial address means we remember someone, but we address through memory someone's life. But the concepts that we use now very often, they're empty, that they're supposed to own the future, which is open and therefore plannable. But at the same time, when we only use words and concepts that are not grounded in our experience, then we lose a touch, perhaps to a certain degree, with our memory also. Because memory is, as Aristotle says, this is one of the first sentences in the metaphysics, is that it's from memory that experience arises. And without it, there's no experience.
Yeah.
So, think about how many concepts there are out there that have just pure abstractions that are always sometime in the future, but the singularity. You can say so many things that are just, it's fixtures of the brain, basically. It's just abstractions that are supposed to be coming at some point, but they're not experiential. No one experiences this. No one sees it. No one feels it. It doesn't touch anyone. We can dream about it, and then we get horrified by it. It's its own version of horror. I mean, horror is precisely what you cannot see. I mean, the good horror movies are it's invisible. The horrifying is not visible.
Yeah.
So, yeah. There we are.
The horror. Now
did I drop out? Sorry.
Right. This sense of, there's also a sense of I've been captured by Heidegger's basic questions, and this part where he's talking about wonderment, right, as a kind of a primordial disposition that philosophy first, right, in some sense came out of. And this way that he goes through, like, I think there's 18, I don't know if he calls them traits of wonder, but that there's something about wonder, right, where it reveals this other part of, I would imagine, of memory, which is is the way that familiarity can have us kind of fall into the everydayness, right? Ordinariness, right? And no longer be confronted with its uncanniness is concealed, right? So there's this just kind of like these little islands that are coming up in this conversation. Just when I heard about when you said horror, like it's very, very close to wonder, right? In this sense of without memory, there is no experience. It's really interesting to think about that, right? So in some, yeah. So this kind of connection with dwelling and also death seems to be primary in here in some way.
Axel, you can go ahead if you want.
Memory being necessary for experience. It seems like an extension, again, of memory being remembering itself, just being this projection of what has been. So it's all these concepts that they're devoid of memory, they're tempocidal concepts, right? It's just
time killing. They're time killing
concepts. Yeah.
In what sense?
Well, they're a continuation of, I guess, the way that I understand. It's a continuation of this breaking things or understanding things in terms of timeless or meaningless parts, which is how I kind of understand the the way that the Gestalt operates. It's to break things into components that are timeless, and they're timeless, and so they're more and more meaningless until eventually they're completely meaningless. There's just nothing there, and then eventually they just become completely unintelligible when you get to the quantum realm. Then oops, it turns out that's not how we get meaning.
Yeah, well, this quantum stuff is so weird, but so the it's a bit unfortunate that there's no distinction that you can make between Erfahrung in German and Erlebnis in German. Usually the last one is translated as lived experience, but that sounds like that's not really at all. So this is how it's translated in Heidegger, but that's really a terrible translation because it means the exact opposite. It's precisely not lived. It's a pre-formatted, already dead in the womb artificial experience that you can enter, which guarantees you a certain reaction. My example sometimes, I don't, maybe you remember, Axel, is the romantic weekend, right? That it sounds so, yeah, of course, I'll book a romantic weekend for us, or I guess before the lockdowns, people were queuing up on Mount Everest. Oh, they were queuing up. Wow. They were queuing up at the peak of Mount Everest, stepping over dead bodies.
So intense.
To be there, to have this experience, not experience, but this artificial simulation of an experience of what it means to stand on the highest mountain of this planet. So this is the strangest thing. You can really be there, but you're not there. Because it's made so comfortable. I mean, it's still tough. I get it to go up there, but it's made as easy as possible to go up there, and you can at this point just pay for it. What used to be an unsurmountable You will have to get prepared. You will have to be fit enough. That's all understood. But there's something about how this is just now another option in a catalog. And also, so this because Axel keeps coming back to Gestell, and that's so crucial. That is exactly how. So, right. So Heidegger says about Gestell. Gestell is the photographic negative of Ereignis. So that means that they are related. That they go together. So both of them will require memory, but in a very specific, different sense.
Yeah.
It's this moment where where you're going back. You're so because I think what Guy. So the first conversation I had with Guy, this is now almost 3 years ago. I was sitting upstairs drinking wine, drunk by the end of it. Drunk when we started it. Anyways, kidding. It was like, it was evening. So, and he brings out something from the beginning after 2 hours that then made it a circle. And it came together, not really a circle, but a spiral that goes up and then comes down and up. So I guess that circling is ultimately all about memory. And in this going back, though, we're not going back. So there's an episode in Black Mirror, the old Black Mirror, when it was still good. I think it's season 2 or season 3, where there's everyone already had they have microchips in their brains, of course, and they can. Everything's filmed through their eyes, and they can go back. So they just switch back and just rewatch what happened. And so a man finds out that his wife implanted a false memory because he's able to put something together from all of this stored memory that he can find out that his wife was cheating on him. So, but this going back, that's sort of the technical representation of this going back and then deducing, this in this very Sherlock Holmesian, cold, logical way that something is wrong. While this going back is not a going back to a data storage that the people who come to you then go through. But I don't know, I can't speak to it, what it is, maybe you can. But this going back is not it's not a technological one, it's not a technical one, it's not an instrumental one. But something is uncovered that wasn't there, somewhere hidden in an archive that just needs to be pulled out, but that comes alive only in that moment. It will have happened in some sense, but the meaning it gets, that arises in this moment of pondering what that may have been. And that opens up possibilities hitherto unseen because they were not even there to be seen. So it's not available but forgotten.
Yeah.
It wasn't even in some sense there.
Yeah.
And that's a living memory because it comes alive, like a tree has to die in winter to come back to life in spring. It's similar here. And the other memory is just, and I think, symbolically or as a parable, what the Black Mirror episode is obviously not about a wife cheating on his husband. So he's cheating on her husband. Sorry. That's not the story. I think this is just a parable for the crushing, if you go back every moment, every insult that you've had to, that you either you said to someone else or that you had to experience yourself or so, and that's still somehow stored in you. That's probably the definition of a psychosis. You just break down mentally. So, but so I think the difficulty will be to articulate in a very specific manner that it doesn't sound just like gobbledygook, and also that people who are very scientifically minded, nothing wrong with that, will not say, well, but what you're saying is it's all just fake memories and I can just manipulate all of them going back. I don't think that's what's happening. This will be the difficult part to say. Maybe we find something now, but if not, we'll find something at some other point. How to respond to that? Yeah.
Well, in the example, like in that conversation that you brought up, it's interesting that brings so much home in the sense of that I mean, we can call it the hermeneutic circle, right? This way that it's a way where you know, in a text, for example, you come across a term that's really, really foreign and it's not really explained, but you kind of get some of it in context, right? And then you keep reading and you totally forget about the word in any explicit sense. And then it comes back 2 or 3 chapters later, and you in this whole walk that you've on some level you've been articulating and dwelling in the meaning of it without even consciously realizing you're doing that. And then when the term comes back, it lights up having all of this history to it, right? And you see the relevance of it. And there's a way where this sense in which, and you really get this with Heidegger and reading phenomenologists, and that I've often noticed that there's something I have found kind of transformational for me in just the act of attempting to understand in the way that they're going about it in these circles, right? There's something kind of I've gleaned from that has deeply affected me in a big way, in the way I see things and the way I understand things, this kind of way. But I also know this in circling, and I think this is one of the reasons why the name circling actually ended up sticking, right? I still don't know who named it. I can't remember who named it, but why it stuck is because there is this precisely sense in which what we start off talking about, right, in some sense sets the context that then withdraws and we forget about it. And then it comes back, right, towards the end. And we realize that's all we've been talking about. But it was necessary to forget it in some sense, right? And in some sense, it goes to the back, completely to the background. And then when we bring it back towards the end, we realize, oh, this is like, that was so necessary. And that's what we were talking about the whole time. But it needed to go away, right? The memory of it needed to go away. And when it came back, it lit up in a big way. That's huge in my experience. Like in terms of understanding, in terms of and there is this element of like, the word dwelling keeps, in some sense we dwell in memories and they indwell in us. And there's that, what I love about the term to dwell is because it's a profound there's so much tacit knowledge. It's so participatory, right? So much is going on in the background that you're indwelled in that you don't have to consciously keep in front of you. You can't own it in some sense.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And so probably will never be able to. Well, something doesn't need to be available.
Yeah.
To in a very crude sense to have an effect, but not even to put it like this. Something does not need to be available at all in order for it to weave through time. There's a quote from Nietzsche that always is Zarathustra, of course. And Zarathustra says, thoughts that come on dove's feet guide the world. So we may not know which thoughts are guiding our world at the moment because they were silent. I mean, with the books and the texts that we have available, at least we can read them. But what about all the thoughts that came before that are not recorded in any way, or that are recorded in a language, or that are lost to us, or lost also to us because we can't even translate it anymore? And there's another quote from the Zarathustra, which is this, from Nietzsche also: and even what you abstain from weaves at the web of all future humanity. Even your nothing is a spider web, and a spider that lives off the blood of the future.
Yeah.
So yeah, it could just turn out, ironically, just to bring this back maybe to different something lighter, that we have all these data storages, that require an ever greater amount of energy, and by the way, also water, just to cool the data storage facilities down. And let's not forget that this is all physically limited. And this is not, there's no cloud, there's no cloud computing. It's just someone else's computer. It's not a cloud that floats by. It's still physically bound, and it's limited. And it could just be ironic. That's what I wanted to say, that, we store all of this data, which are rarefied memory particles, in order to hold on to something, to have access to the world and keep it, store it. And it turns out that none of what we're storing actually will have any bearing on the genuine future that's coming, because it was all along the nothing, that which we didn't do, that which we didn't think, that which we forgot, or that which we should have forgotten, that was much more influential for what is to come. It's like you have a warehouse where you store a lot of things because you think they're going to be in fashion in 20 years and you'll make a lot of money. Mm-hmm. Turns out no one wants to wear tight stretch jeans pants in 2021 anymore, or something. So
it's funny. I'm getting, as we're talking about this, I feel like we're walking. I feel like we're walking our way into something that I'm realizing. I was thinking about, I don't think much about memory, but I'm kind of, as we're talking about, I'm realizing, like, at some level, it's like the only thing that's going on is this. There's this sense to it, right? But there's a way in which not only does not everything need to be captured and held into, right, but it's necessity of withdrawing, right? It works by precisely not being something that we can grab onto and own or have, or, right, that there's, and I think that there is this kind of quality of, and I think Heidegger really is, in some sense, points to this constantly, this way where the presence of the unconcealment of concealedness as such, this way that, right, this kind of sense of memory is something that we dwell in, that's precisely not what's in front of us that we can have, and that there is a way of in some sense comporting ourselves in relationship to that, right? And it's funny, as I think about this, there's a kind of it seems to be there's a humility that seems implicit in that, right? Just being aware that there's some hand, right, that's operating out of view, that in some sense is the most constituting of everything that we see. And kind of, in some sense, holding that in our relationship with what we're in relationship with, right? Is this,
it's all about holding. It's holding is maybe even more of an important word than being. Honestly, I'm thinking to hold and to have in the sense of holding.
Yeah,
is maybe even more crucial now than to be. Being held and hold, because that's what we're trying to do all the time, is trying to fight. It's very, very American saying, also trying to find someone to hold on to, or something to hold on to. Give me something to hold on to. But this hold is in scolaire, for example, right? In what we translate as leisure, which makes no sense. Scolaire as that which grants a ground on which to stand, or something to hold on to in that sense. Sorry, Axel, I think you wanted to say something. No? You were just nodding. No, come on now, Axel.
No, I have to think about what you just said about scolaire, you know. The necessity of forgetting.
Yeah.
That's forgetting is what gifts the present, right? The forgetting of the past gifts the present. I think seems. Go out on a limb, and I'm going to say that I think that's what's going on. That it's just that it's a more radical simultaneous disclosure and concealing. It's a radical disclosure and concealing that crosses that cuts across occasions.
Yeah, this, by the way, I think occasion is the way in which Czech Krasuski, who's been, he's very good linguistically in English, and he always comes up with, so he's doing courses and a bit more for Halcyon. He's a psychiatrist from Chicago. Jack came up with a translation for Möglichkeit. I think you know this guy from De Gennaro, that he translated as the likeliness, I think.
Yeah.
But Jack translated it last summer during a course as occasion.
Yeah.
So something that falls into place then also. Axel, go on, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, I almost use it interchangeably with a time, an occasion, a time. Precisely because when you talk about an occasion, then it really emphasizes that ecstatic aspect, or that, that merging of the ecstasies, right, of past, present, and future. And so it's so I think it brings to mind something that's more in line with the way that we think about a time. If we're thinking about it as, well, there is time there at work, but what's happening is happening in a certain light. That light is, relating to the particular way in which being discloses itself. So, something that I thought of, I mean, kind of related to this. One interesting thing about the photo album is now I'm starting to think about these photo albums, like your Apple photo album, and how it literally enframes memories. So that's one case in which the word enframing really does refer to is appropriate. It refers to, so it really doesn't, it frames your memories, and at the same time it destroys the links between your memories by replacing this cross-occasional disclosure with this organization of the photo album. So that organization and the search capabilities, the way in which you present the photographs, and the tagging of the photographs, and you tag them with this and that then searching for like a tag, oh, who's in this photograph, that replaces what would otherwise be this free flowing of this free cross-occasional disclosure, which would connect the photographs into a truly alive, woven remembering of your life, basically. So it kind of maps. It's funny. So the enframing,
mm-hmm.
the literal enframing of the memory cuts the connection between the memories, and
but between the memories and you could say, but between memories or a thinking memory. There's no thinking then. It's not necessary. It's not necessary to think, because it's made available and presented, and it's very striking that it's always moving, right? It's not still. It's just the pictures are moving, and they add music to it. It's
a simulation. That motion is it creates sort of this simulation of a sense of a dynamic remembering, right? It's that whatever it's called, Ken Burns effect.
But it's so important when there's this assumption that the machine will take over and AI will come and blah blah blah. Well, what does it need? Whatever it is here, it needs nothing more than the human being. And the more sort of sterile, you can see this on Twitter right now, right? Twitter used to be, a couple of years ago, before the lockdowns also, it was just, and also during, it was wild. And, there was a sort of a strange, I think they call swarm intelligence. Intelligence is not, is highly rational or so, but finding, through just utter weirdness, finding things out. And now it's becoming a totally sterile place that's all full of echo chambers and silos, etc. So nothing is emerging anymore, which is, look at, people are very worried about the metaverse. If Facebook is any indication what the metaverse will be, it'll just be people trapped in their self-portraits from 10 years ago, in their own memory holes. It's going to be a complete nightmare, just as Facebook is now a nightmare of paranoia, and your parents on there too. Just kidding. But this is for our younger generation. It's like, all of a sudden, my mother is on Facebook. What? So this is what happened about 5-6 years ago, and then it all just died. But what it always needs is that we do go out there. During the first lockdown, you could see very nervous ads from Google So, go out, you can still get takeaway, you can still rate your takeaway. So it needs us to be out there, rate everything, evaluate everything, upload pictures constantly, because the algorithm is not a substance, not a thing in itself or anything like this. It requires constant feeding, and it requires a constant verification of our memories. Of course, the more terrible aspect is not, because these systems they will go away, but whether or how the next generations, what kind of memory they will have, or memory building, or so. That's the more pertinent question, perhaps, I suppose.
So this sense of occasion, likelihood, possibility. There's I was sitting at the park. I live by, like, on the bay, and I was sitting. There's a park out there that I sit at a lot, and there was I watched this old man, right, and it really struck me. I've been understanding what exactly struck me about it, but it really struck me. This old man who had a cane, and you could tell that he'd had that cane for like 100 years, right? And I watched him just walk across the park to the other side of the park, and he disappeared. And I've been thinking about this sense, about this kind of sense in which there was an one-ment, right, between the cane and the old man, right? In some sense, that not a one of substance, but in some sense, this, like, the embodiment of this old man literally indwelled in that cane, and that cane indwelled in that old man, right? In such a way that, like, you could imagine that if you took the cane away from the old man and you looked at it, like, you could kind of you could probably picture what the old guy looked like just through the cane, right? And then vice versa. So in some sense, I think I was thinking about this kind of indwelling and indwelled by, that in many ways, in some sense, I think that's our relationship with possibility, right? Even with the various kind of teloses in our lives, that they're not ones in which, on one level I can sit down and, like, make the goals out and I know what I'm aiming at, but really, I think I think that actually our sense of telos, of our sense of possibility in future, is something that discloses, right, over time. And it seems to, and I think that's what the face is on some level, right? You're in some, was it Mark Twain who said that you've earned the face you have by the time you're 45 or something, right? I think that kind of gets at that sensibility that the face is seems to me is a kind of indwelled recollection, right? Or memory of what we're facing, right? You can see in someone's face, right, the possibilities that are no longer open and haven't been opened, right? You can see the loss of the possibility, and you can see the ones that are open to them, and in the way of being concerned. There's something around this notion of character, right? That shows up in the face, and this way that our face, in some sense, animates what we've been facing in some regard, right? I'm just getting that sense of things about this, right? This notion of dwelling in and indwelled by.
Yeah, and no one will ever say this about this iPhone.
Exactly.
It's never. Oh yes, that must be Axel's iPhone.
Yeah.
It's all his soul has really transferred over and migrated into this thing. It's because it isn't a thing in any proper sense. There's no gathering in there. Yeah, and the face precisely is so. The Gesicht is the German word. The Gesicht, so the gathering of seeing and being seen, of the sense of seeing, but also the dimension of any openness to the world in the first place. So the dimension of fire, which is why Apollo is for the Greeks the god of seeing. And there's, so you said there's a recollection of what we're facing or have faced, maybe also how we face it or face up to it, as the English vernacular can also say, right? To face up to something.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Right. What are you connecting to there, Axel? What are you connecting to there, Axel?
Well, I mean, I'm always obsessed with the idea of anything that's old and that has a palpable historical depth. Always like that cane. But yeah, I hadn't thought about the face as being an incredible example of that. Yeah, that's
precisely a memory in which it's like the face in some sense is like a memory.
Our memories are really stored. Our memories are not stored in our brains. They're actually stored in our face.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not like the person is walking around
held in our face
in some kind of grasping hold of knowing what their face is storing or something like that. It's like, it's precisely, it's also a concealment of their history in some way. It's a tacit, right? Deeply implicit sense of things that I'm sure the person probably isn't even conscious, has anything like an objective sense of it, yet you can kind of, just like that cane and that guy, like you can, if you just took the cane and looked at it, the cane will memorize the guy. Like you can just imagine it in some sense. I think the face is very much like that.
Yeah. Depth. I think about, the deep reserve, right? The deep reserve of things. The moreness of things, the deep reserve of things, and that.
Yeah.
And so that depth, the deep reserve of a person is in their face, and we see that the depth, right? We say there's depth there. There's someone who lived, someone who's in the same. We may look at it like a historical artifact and not really know where it's been or what its history is, but you can sense that it has depth. You know that there's a lot of meaning there to be uncovered. It's and they're magical. I firmly believe that historical artifacts are magical. I know that the Freemasons understand this, and almost through osmosis. I think if you just if you're around historical artifacts or monuments, that possibilities for being are there to be discovered, and from the past that they're completely unimaginable. I think that they're powerful. I think that's why there are these ideas like the Holy Grail, or people trying to get a hold of the spear that pierced Jesus's side, and all these kinds of things.
Right. When you come across those things, or like a really old house, or like an old medieval town, right? That thing that you feel, in some sense, I'm wondering about, because it's not like those things, go, here's the history of me. It's more like they what I think you see is a conceal, like the history concealed in it. It's interesting because it's not always obvious what we're looking at when we're looking at stuff, right? Like it I noticed this, I think one of the things with having like when you have your own kid, like my wife said something the other day. She's like, it's almost like that our nothing unfolded and here he was, right? And I think that's kind of what we see when we look at him first, is we see his non-existence first, and then we see him in some sense, and it's animated with this strong sense that he once wasn't, and that all of a sudden he's here, and there's something so uncanny about that, right? So we literally see his non-existence in our perception of him, right? And that's what animates him. I think there's probably something going on with that. With
with history.
Yeah.
So this concealedness, right? It can go in all directions. So there's a passage. I'm from Augsburg in Germany. So, and funnily enough, Heidegger writes about Augsburg, about one paragraph in, I think, his diary on his trip to Greece, because they go to Munich from where they take a train to Venice or so. And Augsburg is very close to Munich. And he says about Augsburg that this is eine gewesene Stadt. So it is a city that is a has-been, right? Like someone he's a has-been, as I think the American vernacular says. So it has been, it was, and it was important also in its time, but its time is no more. So what it now only has left is economic busyness and in industry, being industrious, etc. But not even on a grand scale, but simply, to kick the can further down the road. So, but also when, for example, here around these shores, when you come to a city, I mean, it's much of Europe, in some sense, you could say is already in that state of a has-been, and it's becoming a bit of a zoo or a park to gaze at ruins. But at the same time, it's this. So the concealedness, though, that I think is crucial. To give another example, Sherwood Forest. There's a legend here on this island of Robin Hood, who apparently may have lived, or the legend at least has lived in Sherwood Forest. And there now are plans to have people walk around with VR goggles to, through the forest, so they're not in the forest, to see Robin Hood in 3D jumping through the trees. Just, to maybe bring this all together about history, fake memory, being somewhere but not being there, nothing concealed, right? Because you walk into that forest as a child and you're 5 years old and someone tells you about Robin Hood before, you will very likely, if you're not holding an iPad in your hand, you will very likely see Robin Hood, but without the goggles. Or you will believe that you are Robin Hood. Mm-hmm. But no longer, because now it's all presented to you, made available. But nothing in that sense shows up. The forest doesn't show up. Mm-hmm. The path on which you walk doesn't appear to you. You don't really know where you are. Mm-hmm. You're trapped in this VR vision of someone else who then determines what this story is now supposed to mean to us. And of course, the story itself loses its meaning.
Yeah.
It is a very significant story.
Yeah.
Because it is the story of someone who is noble, yeah, in the sense of his soul, and fights injustice, etc.
Yeah.
That's out the window. It's, of course, that story is still told, but it is made so, it's so in your face, it's just in a very vernacular sense, so in your face, so available that it disappears.
Yeah, and precisely available as something to consume, something ready-made. Yeah.
Yeah, and
what,
I think also,
yeah, and
by making it also available, to come back to this example of a history, so a history that's lived, a story that's lived, that's one that's actually concealed. It's when it becomes expressed tradition, it's already done and over.
Yeah.
And where we are right now in Europe, and probably also America, is a strange case. America, we could maybe at some point have a long dialogue on what America is. Not politically, because everybody has an opinion on this, but metaphysically, that's much more important, I think, what America means, because America is this great liberation from the heavy soil of metaphysics and history. It's just boom, gone. Nothing. just wild open space. It's the opposite of Europe at any time. So anyways, but this is it for another time, but I think it's in this concealedness, which is not, not that something is hidden away, but it's concealed from necessarily being. It doesn't require to be made explicit. In that sense, meaning can also be just implicit is another word, but I like concealed then better, because it's in some sense contained and sheltered.
Yeah.
But it's never fully articulated.
Yeah. Yeah.
It articulates itself in, for example, the way in which people live in that village or in that small town.
Yeah. And that incompleteness, in some sense, is precisely that you can kind of feel where dwelling starts to take hold, right? Drawing in a participating, finding yourself in it, right? Yeah, this sense where concealment is what shows. That's what you guys, I have to complete this.
Same.
I'm out of time.
Always end on a high note.
Yeah, great.
Always with a good joke. Okay.
It's a great conversation.
Thank you, Guy. Thank you very much.
Awesome.
More soon.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.